I had never been so nervous in my life. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, its rhythmic ticking only adding to the mounting pressure in my chest. I stood in my cramped apartment, staring at the suit I had laid out on the bed, a dark charcoal number I bought off the sale rack a few weeks ago, not the most expensive, but the best I could afford. As I buttoned up my shirt and adjusted the tie, I felt a lump form in my throat. Tonight was the night I would meet Mia's parents. It was supposed to be a simple dinner, a casual introduction. But for me, it felt like the most important night of my life. Mia had grown up in a world I didn't belong to. Her family was wealthy, powerful, and had a long history of success. They lived in a mansion out in the hills, a sprawling estate surrounded by manicured lawns and expensive cars. Her father, Edward, was a well-respected entrepreneur, a man who wore tailored suits and carried an air of authority with every step. Her mother, Diana, was the picture of elegance, always poised, always perfect. I, on the other hand, was a 29-year-old mechanic who ran a small bike repair shop in the city. I had worked hard to get where I was, but no matter how successful I'd become, I knew it wasn't the kind of success Mia's parents would appreciate. Mia had warned me her parents wouldn't exactly be thrilled to meet someone like me. I wasn't polished, I wasn't Ivy League, and I sure as hell wasn't from their world. I was an outsider in every sense. But Mia and I had been together for a year now, and despite the differences, we had something real. She loved me, and I loved her. I was willing to do anything for her, even if it meant stepping into a world that made me feel small and inadequate. The problem was, Mia didn't just want me to meet her parents. She wanted me to fit in. She wanted me to be someone I wasn't. I'd never been good at pretending to be someone I wasn't, but for her, I had agreed to try. She had told me exactly what to say, how to act. Just say you're in bike performance management, she'd suggested when we talked about it the night before. Don't mention the shop, or how you've been working on bikes since you were a teenager. Mia was insistent that I avoid anything that might reveal the truth of who I was, a mechanic with grease under his nails and calluses on his hands. I was nervous, yes, but also frustrated. I had worked hard to get where I was. I didn't need to pretend to be some corporate exec to impress her parents. I was proud of what I did, but Mia had begged me. Please, she had said, her voice trembling on the other end of the phone. You don't know how much this means to me. And so, there I was, standing in front of the mirror in a suit that felt too tight, staring at a man who didn't quite look like himself. I felt like a fraud. The person I was, and the person I was pretending to be, didn't align. But I had made my choice. For her, I would pretend, for one night. I picked up my phone to check the time. The dinner was supposed to start in less than an hour. My hands were clammy, and my stomach twisted into knots. I wasn't sure if it was the nerves or the guilt of pretending to be someone I wasn't. Either way, I was already late, thanks to the fact that I had spent the last 20 minutes in my small apartment trying to scrape grease off my hands, which seemed to be an impossible task. No matter how much I scrubbed, no matter how much hand sanitizer I used, I couldn't seem to get rid of the smell of engine oil that clung to me like a second skin. It was who I was. But Mia didn't want her parents to know that. I took one last look at myself in the mirror, straightened my tie, and took a deep breath. This was going to be fine, I told myself. It's just dinner. I grabbed my keys, walked out the door, and into my rusted old pickup truck, the one I had restored myself. It was a far cry from the shiny sedans I imagined Mia's parents would be driving, but I loved it. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The drive to her parents' estate was long, and the roads leading out of the city seemed to stretch on forever. As I passed through the busy streets of the city, they gave way to the sprawling suburbs, and soon I was driving past gates so high they seemed to touch the sky. The estates here were enormous, with perfectly trimmed lawns and luxury cars parked in the driveways. The further I drove, the more my nerves kicked into overdrive. My stomach turned, and my palms were sweaty on the steering wheel. I was about to enter a world where I didn't belong, where every word I spoke would be scrutinized, every action analyzed. I kept telling myself to just make it through dinner, get through the night. For Mia, I loved her, and this was what she wanted. As I neared the gates to the estate, I saw them, The towering pillars that marked the entrance to her family's home loomed ahead. I was almost there. My heart hammered in my chest, and I felt a lump form in my throat. What was I doing here? Just then, something caught my eye. On the side of the road, a motorcycle was parked awkwardly, its engine silent. A woman was standing beside it, looking at it in frustration. Something inside me clicked. I couldn't leave her stranded, could I? I glanced at the time. Mia's parents would never forgive me if I was even later, but I couldn't help it. I had to stop. It was just who I was. I pulled over and got out of the truck. "Trouble?" I called out, trying to sound casual. The woman looked up, her eyes sharp and appraising. She had an air of elegance about her, even standing on the side of the road. "This bike's broken down," she said, her voice tinged with frustration. "My ride's lost, and I've been waiting here for over an hour." Something about the situation felt familiar. This was a problem I could fix. And so, despite the growing panic in my chest about being late, I walked over and knelt down to take a look at the bike. I crouched down to inspect the motorcycle, the engine's quiet hum the only sound in the otherwise still evening. It was a beautiful bike, an older model Triumph, chrome shining even in the fading light. I could tell right away what the issue was. Something so simple, but frustrating to someone who didn't know their way around an engine. The fuel line had come loose, a quick fix, but one that required a steady hand and the right tools. I glanced at my watch. I was already running late, and Mia's parents were probably waiting for me by now, tapping their watches and judging every second that ticked by. But there was something about the woman's calm, almost regal air that made me want to help. I couldn't just leave her stranded. "Let me take a look," I said, already reaching into the back of my truck for the small toolkit I kept on hand. She raised an eyebrow, eyeing my truck with its rusted, well-worn exterior. "I'm afraid you're not exactly dressed for this," she said, her voice polite but laced with something that suggested she wasn't used to dealing with people who wore grease-stained clothes. I shot her a half smile. "I've been through worse," I replied, unbothered. I pulled on the gloves I had stashed in the back of my truck. My hands were already stained with the remnants of the bike repairs I had done earlier in the week. But I didn't mind. This was what I did. This was who I was. I crouched down next to the bike, leaning in close as I unscrewed a few bolts and gently pulled at the fuel line. I could feel the woman's eyes on me as I worked, but I didn't mind. I was used to the scrutiny, though it was usually from customers who didn't understand why a mechanic might take more than a few minutes to get something right. This woman, however, seemed different. She wasn't judging me. She was watching, waiting for something to happen. As I fixed the fuel line, she asked a few questions about the bike, showing a surprising interest in the mechanical side of things. Her tone wasn't condescending, like so many others who had come to my shop over the years. No, she seemed genuinely curious. "I haven't seen one of these in a while," I said, tightening the last of the bolts. "The older models have a certain charm to them, don't they?" She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "They do," she agreed. "My husband always had a passion for motorcycles. I never quite understood it, but I admired his dedication." That gave me pause. I glanced up at her, noticing for the first time the faint lines around her eyes and the quiet wisdom in her expression. She wasn't just some random person I'd happened to help on the side of the road. There was a sense of gravitas about her, a presence that I couldn't ignore. She wasn't just a random woman. I was dealing with someone who had seen and done things in life, someone who commanded respect. I finished securing the line and stood up, brushing my hands off on the rag I'd brought with me. "All done," I said, stepping back and wiping my hands clean. "Give it a try." She climbed onto the bike, looking at me with a mix of curiosity and something else I couldn't quite place. I stepped back, watching as she turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered for a second, then roared to life, a satisfying sound that made my chest swell with pride. It wasn't the bike that made me proud, though. It was the act of fixing something with my own hands, of solving a problem. The woman beamed, her eyes lighting up with genuine appreciation. "You're a miracle worker," she said, her voice full of gratitude. I was starting to think I'd be stuck here forever. "It's nothing," I replied, trying to brush off the praise. "Just glad to see it running again." She swung her leg over the bike and gave me a long, thoughtful look. You know, you're not just good with tools, she said, her voice softer now. There's something about you. You don't just fix things, you make them better. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach, an uncomfortable mix of pride and confusion. I didn't think of myself that way. I was just a mechanic. Fixing things was what I did, but I never thought it was anything particularly special. Still, there was something in the way she spoke that made me question that belief. Was there more to it? Did people really see me that way? Thanks, I said, clearing my throat and trying to shake off the unease. It's the job, right? She smiled again, this time with a warmth that seemed to radiate from her. It's not just the job, she said. It's the heart behind it. I felt my face flush slightly, unsure how to respond. The words felt too big for me. In my world, things were simple. You worked, you fixed, and that was enough. But in this moment, talking to this woman, I realized that maybe there was more to it than that. You really have no idea how much this means to me, she said, shifting her weight on the bike. But I'm afraid I'm not sure how to repay you. I waved her off. No need to repay me, just paying it forward, that's all. She nodded, her smile still intact. I appreciate that, but I still want to do something for you. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. My instincts told me to tell her it was fine, that I didn't need anything. But something about the sincerity in her voice made me stop. Well, I said slowly, just help someone else out when you can. That's all I ask. She gave me a long, considering look, then finally nodded. I'll keep that in mind, and I wish you luck with what you're about to do next. I watched her ride off, the roar of the Triumph's engine fading as she disappeared into the distance. A small sense of pride filled my chest, the kind you get when you know you've done something right. But as the sound of the bike faded into the evening air, my heart sank. I glanced at my watch. An hour late. Mia's parents were going to kill me. I had no idea what kind of impression I was about to make, but I knew it was probably too late to salvage it. Sighing, I got back in my truck and started the engine. There was no turning back now. I just had to hope I could somehow make it through dinner with Mia's parents. By the time I pulled into Mia's family's estate, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting everything in a golden, almost surreal light. The towering gates loomed ahead of me like the entrance to another world, and I could feel the weight of the evening pressing down on my shoulders. My hands tightened around the steering wheel of my pickup truck as I approached the long, winding driveway. The white gravel crunched under my tires as I drove past row after row of perfectly manicured hedges, towering trees, and pristine lawns. The house itself stood in front of me like something out of a picture, an imposing 3-story Georgian mansion, every inch of it meticulously designed, every window glittering with lights from within. I parked my truck at the far end of the driveway, away from the shiny luxury sedans parked near the front steps, and sat there for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I was late. Mia had said dinner would start at 6, and I was well over an hour behind. My stomach twisted into knots as I thought about her parents, Edward and Diana, and how they would surely see my tardiness as a sign of disrespect. They were the type of people who valued punctuality above everything else, who saw lateness as an affront to their time, their money, their world. And here I was, a mechanic from the city, with grease stains on my hands and my truck looking like something out of a junkyard. I glanced at my watch. 7:30 p.m. I was already in trouble. I wiped my hands on a napkin from the glove box, futilely trying to remove the black streaks from my fingers. The grease had seeped into my skin, and no matter how much I scrubbed, it was never going to go away. I took a deep breath, checked myself one last time in the rearview mirror, and opened the door. The moment I stepped out of the truck, the weight of the world seemed to settle on me. The grandeur of the estate was overwhelming, and I suddenly felt like a small fish in a tank full of sharks. My shoes crunched on the gravel as I walked up to the front door, my heart hammering in my chest. I rang the doorbell, and the sound echoed in the massive hallway inside. I waited, shifting nervously on my feet, glancing at the door, then back at my truck, hoping to somehow blend in. The door swung open, and there she was, Mia, her face a mix of concern and surprise. The moment she saw me, her eyes widened in shock. "Oh my God, Jason, what happened?" she asked, her voice full of worry as she took in my disheveled appearance. My shirt was slightly askew, my hair was a mess, and my hands, well, there was no hiding those. I could feel my face flush with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry," I stammered. There was a woman on the side of the road. Her bike broke down, and I had to help her. I didn't want to leave her stranded. Mia's eyes flickered with something that could have been relief, or maybe just frustration. Hard to tell. But before she could say anything more, her parents stepped into the hallway behind her. Edward was tall, well-dressed, his suit impeccable, his expression an unreadable mask of aristocratic disapproval. Diana, his wife, stood next to him, her pearl necklace gleaming in the light, her expression one of mild surprise that quickly turned to disdain as she looked me up and down. "This is him?" Edward's voice cut through the silence like a knife. It was as if the air itself had grown thicker, more oppressive. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, feeling like I was about to be judged and found wanting. "I'm really sorry," I said again, but Edward raised a hand, silencing me. "We don't have time for excuses, young man," he said coldly, his eyes scanning me from head to toe. "Punctuality is a sign of respect in our world, something you clearly lack." Diana sniffed and crossed her arms over her chest, a look of thinly veiled contempt on her face. "You've made no effort to even look presentable," she remarked, her gaze lingering on the grease stains on my hands. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the words didn't come. What could I say? They were right. I had tried to clean myself up, but nothing was going to change the fact that I was late, dirty, and completely out of place. The feeling of inadequacy settled in my stomach like a stone. Just as I was about to apologize again and make some excuse to leave, a familiar sound reached my ears. The low rumble of a motorcycle engine, unmistakable and growing louder by the second. My heart skipped a beat. The woman from the side of the road. I turned around, my gaze instinctively following the sound of the engine. And there she was, pulling up in front of the estate on the Triumph I had just fixed. The same woman, now smiling as she killed the engine and gracefully dismounted the bike. Edward and Diana froze, staring at her with wide eyes. Mia's jaw dropped, and I could see the confusion flood her face. She didn't understand what was happening. "Mother?" she asked in a trembling voice. The woman smiled, her demeanor calm and assured. "Yes, darling, it's me," she said, turning to Mia. "I do hope I'm not interrupting anything." Mia's parents stood in stunned silence as the woman walked up to the porch, her heels clicking softly on the stone steps. She was older, no doubt, but there was something undeniably regal about her presence, something that commanded respect without her having to say a word. She took one look at Edward and Diana and gave them a small, dismissive smile. Then, without even acknowledging them, she turned to me. "Jason, wasn't it?" she asked, her tone warm and kind, completely at odds with the icy reception I'd just received from her daughter's parents. "I've heard a lot about you from Mia, but I've heard even more from your actions. You seem like a man of substance, and that's more than enough for me." I stood there, completely stunned, unsure how to respond. She took my arm in a surprisingly firm grip, leading me toward the dinner table. "Come along, Jason," she said, smiling at me. "I think it's about time we all had dinner, don't you?" As I walked into the house beside her, I couldn't help but glance back at Mia's parents. Their expressions a mix of disbelief and something that almost looked like fear. They didn't know what to make of this sudden turn of events, and I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of vindication. The power had shifted. And for the first time that evening, I felt like I might actually belong here. The dining room was like something out of a dream, or maybe a nightmare, depending on how you looked at it. The long, polished mahogany table stretched out before me, covered with fine china, silverware so shiny I could practically see my reflection in it, and crystal glasses that caught the light in a way that made everything feel too perfect, too grand. The room was bathed in the soft glow of golden chandeliers, their light bouncing off the walls, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere. It was beautiful, no doubt, but for someone like me, someone used to the hum of a small workshop and the smell of motor oil, it felt like I had stepped into an entirely different world. As I sat down, my mind raced. I kept reminding myself that this wasn't real, that I didn't belong here, that I wasn't supposed to be in this world of opulence and refinement. But as Mia's grandmother, the woman I had helped on the side of the road, settled into the seat beside me with the grace of someone who had spent decades commanding the attention of any room she entered, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. Mia's parents, Edward and Diana, remained silent as we all took our seats. I couldn't help but notice the way their eyes flicked to me every so often, their judgment still palpable despite the unexpected presence of Mia's grandmother. Edward cleared his throat but didn't speak. Diana, her arms crossed, seemed to be calculating something, her gaze fixed on the wine glass in front of her. Their discomfort was so thick I could almost feel it pressing against my chest, and it made me want to shrink back into myself. But then I looked at Mia. She was sitting across from me, her eyes wide and uncertain, but her lips pulled into a faint smile, a silent encouragement that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. "Jason?" Mia's grandmother said, her voice smooth like velvet, but carrying an authority that made everyone in the room fall silent. "I've been hearing quite a bit about you, and I have to admit, I'm impressed. Mia tells me you have a certain knack for working with your hands." She leaned in slightly, her gaze direct, but not unkind. "You've got a gift, don't you?" I wasn't sure what to say. I had never been one to seek attention, especially not the kind that came with compliments like that. But there was something about the way she spoke, the sincerity in her voice, that made me feel as though I wasn't just some mechanic to be dismissed, something I had come to expect from people like Edward and Diana. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady as I responded. "It's just work," I said, my fingers playing nervously with the edge of my napkin. "I've always loved fixing things. It's just what I do." She smiled, and I could see the approval in her eyes, a small glint of something deeper than just politeness. "It's not just work," she replied, her voice warm but firm. "It's passion. And passion is something that money can't buy." Her words seemed to hang in the air for a moment, and I felt the weight of them settle on me. There was something about this woman that felt different from everyone else in the room. Where Edward and Diana saw someone beneath them, someone unworthy, she saw someone with substance, someone whose work meant something. It was an odd kind of validation, one I hadn't expected. And in that moment, I realized that maybe I had been wrong to think I couldn't fit into this world. Dinner began, and for the first time since I had stepped into the house, I felt a strange sense of calm. Mia's grandmother, Matilda, kept the conversation going. Her questions aimed at me in a way that made me feel like she was genuinely interested in who I was, not just my job or my background. The more she asked, the more I found myself opening up, talking about my shop, about the bikes I worked on, and the satisfaction I got from restoring them to their former glory. She listened intently, her eyes never leaving mine, and I found myself growing more comfortable with each word I spoke. At one point, Edward couldn't help himself. He cleared his throat and tried to interject. "Speaking of investments," he began, his voice louder than usual, trying to regain some semblance of control. "I've been looking into some stocks recently. The market's been a bit volatile, but I think there's potential in some of the pre-war vehicles. They're a growing market." Matilda raised an eyebrow, but didn't let him finish. "Edward," she said, cutting him off with a soft but commanding tone, "we're not discussing imaginary numbers tonight. We're talking about real work, about skill, about craftsmanship. These are things that have real value." Her gaze flicked toward me, and I felt my chest puff out slightly. "Mark is a man who builds things, Edward. Something I fear is becoming a lost art in this family." Edward's face reddened, but he didn't say anything else. Diana, who had been watching the exchange with growing tension, remained silent. The subtle power shift in the room was undeniable. Matilda had effortlessly dismissed Edward's attempt to steer the conversation into more familiar, financially driven waters, and instead brought the focus back to something far more meaningful, something I could relate to. I glanced at Mia, who was watching me with wide eyes, a look of awe on her face that made my heart race. This was the first time I'd ever felt truly accepted in a room like this, not because of who I was pretending to be, but because of who I really was. As the evening went on, Matilda continued to steer the conversation, subtly reminding her son and daughter-in-law of the values they seemed to have lost sight of. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about appearances. It was about something deeper, something more tangible: character, passion, and the ability to create and build with your own two hands. She reminded me of my worth in a way that was quiet but absolute. And as the meal came to a close, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride that had eluded me for so long. "Jason?" Matilda said after the last course was cleared, her voice warm but firm. "I think it's time we discuss something of real importance." She paused, glancing at Edward and Diana before turning back to me. "My late husband, Sophia's grandfather, was a collector of fine automobiles. His collection, several priceless vehicles, has been sitting untouched for years. I believe it's time someone with real skill takes over the responsibility of restoring it." My heart skipped a beat. "You mean?" She nodded, a satisfied smile spreading across her face. "I believe I've just found the perfect person for the job." My mind raced as Matilda's words sank in. The idea of restoring a collection of priceless cars that had been sitting untouched for years, was something I never could have imagined. It was beyond anything I'd ever dreamed of. Here I was, a mechanic from the city, sitting at the dinner table with Mia's family, a family who had wealth, legacy, and influence, and she was offering me a role I had only ever fantasized about. The magnitude of it all left me momentarily speechless, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a physical force. I glanced around the table, but no one seemed to react the way I expected. Edward and Diana were silent, their faces a mixture of disbelief and something else I couldn't quite place. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was resentment. Whatever it was clear they were not happy with this turn of events. They had spent the entire evening trying to diminish me, judging me for the grease on my hands, the smallness of my business, the fact that I didn't fit into their world. And now Matilda had completely turned the tables, throwing their world into chaos by validating me, not just as someone who could fix things, but as someone worthy of taking charge of an entire legacy. I turned my attention back to Matilda, my heart still racing. "Are you serious?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. It felt like I was dreaming, like this couldn't possibly be real. Matilda's smile never wavered. "Of course I'm serious," she said, her voice steady and confident. "Your skill, your passion for your work, it's exactly what this collection needs. These cars aren't just machines, Jason. They're a part of history, and they deserve someone who will treat them with the respect they deserve." I felt a rush of emotions flood through me: pride, excitement, disbelief. This was everything I had ever wanted. I had always been fascinated by classic cars, the craftsmanship that went into each one, the way they had been built to last, to tell stories. And now I was being asked to take care of a collection of some of the most valuable vehicles in the world. Still, a part of me hesitated. "But I began, but Matilda raised a hand, cutting me off. "You're not just anything, Jason," she said firmly. "You're someone who knows what it takes to make something run, to bring it back to life. There's no better person for this job than you." Her gaze softened slightly as she continued. "I've seen the way you work, the way you treat your craft. That's not something you can fake. It's a rare thing, and I'm not about to let it go to waste." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. The gravity of the situation was overwhelming. Here was a woman who didn't just see me for what I was on the surface, but for what I was capable of. She recognized the value in me that I hadn't fully seen in myself. And as much as I had always felt like an outsider in Mia's world, this was her way of pulling me in, of giving me a place not just in her family, but in something far more significant, something that mattered. "I don't know what to say," I replied honestly, my mind still trying to catch up to the whirlwind of emotions I was feeling. Matilda's smile softened, and she placed a hand gently on mine. "You don't have to say anything, Jason. You just need to understand that I believe in you. I trust you." Those words, those simple, powerful words, were enough to cement my decision. In that moment, I realized that this was more than just a job. It was a chance to prove to myself that I was more than the greasy mechanic I had always thought of myself as. It was a chance to step into a world I had never imagined, to take something broken and bring it back to life, just like I had done with countless bikes over the years. "I'll do it," I said, my voice steady now, the confidence building within me. "I'll take care of them. I'll restore them." Matilda's eyes sparkled with approval. I knew you would, she said with a wink. I'll have Henderson give you the keys to the garage tomorrow morning. I trust you to take it from there. I nodded, still trying to wrap my head around what was happening. Thank you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I won't let you down. As the evening wore on, I felt a sense of calm settle over me, as if something deep inside me had clicked into place. The tension that had been building in my chest throughout the night began to dissipate, and for the first time, I felt like I belonged. Not just in this house, but in the world Mia had grown up in. I had spent so long feeling like an outsider, trying to fit into a world that didn't seem to have a place for someone like me. But Matilda had given me that place, not by changing who I was, but by accepting me for who I was. Dinner came to a close, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Mia's parents remained silent for the most part, their disapproval still hanging heavy in the air, but Matilda's presence seemed to outweigh their coldness. She was the one in control now, and it was clear that her decision was final. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, and before I knew it, we were standing up from the table, heading toward the door. As Mia and I stepped outside, the cool night air hit my face, and I couldn't help but smile. She looked at me with a mixture of pride and relief, her eyes soft and full of admiration. You did it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You really did it. I did it for you, I replied, pulling her into a hug. For us. She smiled against my chest, and for the first time, I felt like everything was falling into place. The future, with all its uncertainties and challenges, no longer seemed so daunting. It felt like a new beginning. I wasn't just a mechanic anymore. I was someone who had earned a place in a world I had once thought I could never be a part of, and I was ready to embrace it. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of urgency, my heart still racing from the events of the previous evening. I had barely slept, the excitement and disbelief swirling around in my head like a constant whirlwind. What had happened last night was still surreal, like some kind of dream I was afraid to wake up from. But now, there was no time to waste. Matilda had given me an opportunity that I could only have dreamed about, and today was the day I would start making it real. After a quick breakfast and a few moments spent checking my phone, nothing urgent, just a couple of missed calls from the shop, I grabbed my keys, slid on a jacket, and drove out of the city, heading toward the estate. I had no idea what to expect when I arrived at the garage, or what Matilda's late husband's car collection might look like, but I knew one thing. I had to give it my all. These cars weren't just vehicles. They were pieces of history, and now they were my responsibility. The drive was short, but felt like an eternity. The morning fog had lifted, but the sun still hung low in the sky, casting everything in soft light. As I turned onto the private road that led to the estate, I couldn't help but feel a familiar sense of dread. I had been in this world of wealth and luxury for only a short time, and even though Matilda had put her faith in me, I couldn't shake the feeling that any mistake would send me back to where I came from, feeling like an outsider once again. When I pulled up to the estate, I saw Henderson, the butler, waiting by the entrance. He didn't smile, but there was a certain quiet professionalism about him as he nodded toward me. Mr. O'Connell, he said, his voice as measured and calm as always. Matilda asked me to show you to the garage. Follow me, please. I followed him in silence, my footsteps heavy on the gravel path, my mind racing. We walked through the estate's sprawling grounds, and for a brief moment, I couldn't help but wonder if I was actually worthy of this, of walking among such grandeur. But then I pushed those thoughts aside. This was my chance. I had earned it. Henderson led me to the back of the estate, where a large, imposing building stood. It was the garage, but it looked more like a fortress than a place for cars. It was completely different from the small, cluttered shop I had back in the city. The doors creaked open, and the first thing I noticed was the sheer size of the space. The garage was far bigger than anything I had ever worked in, its high ceilings and vast interior giving it the feel of a museum. In the far corner, I could see the outlines of several vehicles, their shapes still shrouded in the dim light. This way, Henderson said, walking ahead of me. He led me to the far side of the garage, where the first car was covered by a large, dusty sheet. I could see the glint of chrome beneath the fabric, and a sense of awe washed over me. Henderson reached down and slowly pulled the sheet off, revealing a vintage 1930s Bugatti, sleek, elegant, and unmistakably powerful. My breath caught in my throat. I had seen pictures of cars like this in books, but standing in front of one, with its curves and polished finish, felt like staring at a work of art. "This is the first one," Henderson said, his voice almost reverent. "It's in need of a thorough restoration, but it's a remarkable piece. Matilda expects only the best from you." I nodded, my throat dry. "I won't let her down," I said, though the weight of the task felt heavier now that I was face to face with the reality of it all. This wasn't just fixing a broken-down bike or a classic motorcycle. These were masterpieces, and they demanded more than skill. They demanded reverence. Henderson gave me a look, one that was almost approving. "I'm sure you'll do well, Mr. O'Connell, but don't underestimate the work ahead of you. These cars are not just machines. They're part of the Prescott family's legacy." I stepped closer to the Bugatti, running my fingers along the smooth lines of the fender. There was so much history here, so much care and craftsmanship that had gone into building this car. But now it was broken, neglected, just sitting here collecting dust. It was up to me to bring it back to life, to restore it to its former glory. "I understand," I said quietly, my voice steady now. I was beginning to understand just how much this meant, not just to Matilda, but to the entire Prescott family. This wasn't just about fixing cars. It was about preserving a legacy. Henderson left me alone in the garage, quietly retreating back into the estate, leaving me with the car. For a moment, I just stood there, taking it all in. The garage, the cars, the immense responsibility now resting on my shoulders. I was about to embark on something that would change everything for me. But as the weight of it all settled in, something else rose up within me. A sense of purpose, a feeling I hadn't had in years. I wasn't just doing this for a paycheck or to prove something to me as parents. I was doing this for me. I was doing this because it was what I was meant to do. I spent the next few hours carefully inspecting the Bugatti, running my hands over every surface, every inch of it. There were small signs of wear and tear, but nothing too severe. This wasn't going to be easy, but it wasn't impossible. I knew what needed to be done, and I knew I had the skills to do it. By the time I finished my initial assessment, the sun was beginning to set, casting a soft orange glow through the garage windows. I stepped back, my body aching from the physical labor, but my mind clear. The car wasn't just a project. It was a challenge, and it was one I was ready to face. I locked up the garage and walked back to my truck, feeling a strange sense of calm. This was my new reality now. I had a purpose here, something bigger than just me. I wasn't just the mechanic anymore. I was part of something much larger, a legacy that I had the chance to rebuild. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The following weeks blurred into one continuous stretch of early mornings and late nights, filled with the hum of engines, the scrape of tools, and the steady rhythm of my hands at work. Each day, I drove out to the estate, the garage now my second home. The Bugatti, the first of Matilda's collection, became my obsession. I pored over every detail, carefully restoring the frame, replacing the worn parts, and meticulously polishing the chrome until it gleamed. The process was slow, deliberate, and demanding. But it was more than just restoring a car. It was about bringing back a piece of history, a piece of the Prescott family's legacy. I couldn't help but feel the weight of it every time I stepped into the garage. Every time I laid my hands on the car, I could almost hear the echoes of the past, the sound of the engine roaring to life, the laughter of those who had once driven it. And there was something powerful in that. The more I worked, the more I felt connected to this family's story, as if, in some small way, I was becoming a part of it. Matilda was a constant presence, checking in regularly, offering advice, and asking about my progress. Her approval meant everything to me. She had given me this opportunity not just because of my skills, but because she believed in my character. Every time she praised me, I could feel my confidence growing, like I was stepping into a role I had always been meant to play. Mia, too, came by whenever she could. She would sit in the corner of the garage, watching me work, her eyes full of admiration. Sometimes we'd talk about everything, about the work, about our future, and even about the things I was still learning about her family. As much as I had thought the world she came from would always be a barrier between us, Mia made it feel less intimidating. She reminded me that, no matter how different our worlds seemed, we shared something real, something that wasn't defined by wealth or status. But as much as I had grown comfortable in the garage, as much as I had come to embrace the challenge of restoring the cars, there were days when the reality of the situation hit me all over again. There were moments when I felt like I was still playing pretend, like I was one misstep away from losing everything. Even though Matilda had given me the job, even though Mia had supported me every step of the way, the judgment from Edward and Diana loomed large. I could feel it in the way they looked at me whenever we crossed paths. I wasn't one of them. I wasn't polished, I wasn't sophisticated, and I sure as hell didn't belong in their world. One afternoon, as I was wrapping up work on the Bugatti, I saw Edward walking toward the garage. His expression was unreadable, but the tightness in his jaw told me everything I needed to know. He didn't approve of me. Not now, not ever. "Jason," he said, his voice formal, his gaze sharp, "Matilda says you've been making progress with the collection." I wiped my hands on a rag, trying to shake off the tension that had instantly coiled in my stomach. "Yes, sir. The Bugatti's almost ready. I've replaced a few of the parts, and I'm working on the finer details now, just making sure everything's running smoothly." He nodded, though I could tell he wasn't really listening. He was just checking in, trying to assess whether I was worthy of the responsibility that had been placed on me. "I see," he said, his tone clipped. "Well, I hope you're not getting too comfortable. Just remember, this is a legacy. It's not some weekend project. We expect the best from you, Jason." I nodded, fighting to keep my frustration in check. "I understand. I'm not taking this lightly. I'll make sure everything is up to your standards." He didn't reply right away. Instead, he just looked at me, his gaze calculating. "I hope so. We wouldn't want any mistakes." There was nothing else to say. Edward didn't care about the work I was doing. He cared about control, about maintaining the image of the Prescott family, the idea that they were untouchable, above it all. It was the same look I had seen in him since the first day I met him. The look of someone who believed that wealth and status were the only things that truly mattered. But I wasn't going to let him shake me. I had come too far, worked too hard. I had proven myself to Matilda, and that was enough for me. The cars I worked on weren't just for show. They were pieces of art, pieces of history. And no matter what Edward thought, I was going to treat them with the respect they deserved. As I turned back to the Bugatti, I heard Mia's voice behind me, light and comforting. "How's it going?" she asked, her presence immediately grounding me. I turned and smiled, relieved to see her. "It's going well. I'm almost finished with this one. Just need to tweak a few more things." She stepped closer, her eyes sparkling. "I know you'll make it perfect," she said softly, her words like a balm to the tension that had settled in my chest. I met her gaze, my heart swelling. For the first time since this whole thing had started, I felt a sense of peace. I wasn't trying to impress anyone anymore. I wasn't trying to prove myself to Edward or anyone else. I was doing what I loved, doing what I was meant to do. And that was enough. Mia reached out and took my hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I'm proud of you," she said, her voice full of warmth. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't need Edward's approval. I didn't need to fit into their world. I had found my place, my purpose, and the people who mattered, Matilda, Mia, and even the cars I worked on, believed in me. That was all the validation I needed. As we stood there hand in hand, I knew that no matter what came next, I had already won. I was building something that no one could take away, something real, something lasting. And that was worth more than any amount of money or status. The weeks that followed felt like a turning point in my life, one that I hadn't expected, but one that seemed to have been waiting for me all along. Each day, I grew more accustomed to the work in the garage, and with each car I restored, I felt myself becoming part of something much larger than just a mechanic in a small shop. The more I learned about the cars, the more I realized how much they represented. They weren't just valuable machines. They were symbols of a legacy, pieces of history. And now, I had the responsibility of preserving them, bringing them back to life in a way that would honor both their creators and the people who had loved them for so many years. Matilda continued to check in regularly, offering support and wisdom, but I could tell she was also giving me space to prove myself. She trusted me to take care of the collection, to restore it, not just because of my skills, but because of my integrity. I wasn't just fixing broken parts. I was breathing new life into something that had once been loved, something that had been allowed to sit idle for far too long. Every car I worked on became more than just a job. It became a personal mission. The garage, once a cold, intimidating place filled with polished floors and towering shelves, now felt like home to me. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. As much as I had grown comfortable in the garage, there were still moments when the weight of the responsibility threatened to crush me. The pressure to get everything right was always there, lingering just under the surface. I had learned early on that Matilda wasn't one to settle for anything less than perfection. And while that drove me to do my best, it also made every mistake feel like a betrayal. Every imperfect part, every slightly misaligned bolt made me feel as if I was falling short. But I pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. It was one of those late nights when I was in the middle of restoring a 1940s Delahaye, carefully replacing the worn leather interior, when I heard the familiar sound of footsteps approaching. I looked up to see Mia standing in the doorway of the garage, her eyes soft but tired. It had been a long day for both of us, but seeing her there always had a calming effect on me. "Hey," I said, wiping my hands on a rag, trying to shake off the fatigue that had settled into my bones. "I didn't expect to see you tonight. Everything okay?" She smiled, stepping closer, and I could tell that something was on her mind. "Yeah," she said, her voice steady but with a hint of something else beneath it. "I've been thinking about something. About us." My stomach fluttered, a mix of excitement and nerves. "What about us?" Mia hesitated for a moment, her gaze flicking over to the cars I had been working on. "I've been thinking about how much you've changed," she said, her voice soft but full of meaning. "About how you've really embraced this world, the cars, the family, and how it's been such a big part of your life now. But I wonder, do you ever feel like you're losing yourself in all of this?" The question caught me off guard. I had never really stopped to think about it, not in those terms. I had been so focused on proving myself, on showing everyone, including myself, that I belonged in this world, that I hadn't taken the time to reflect on whether I was truly being true to myself. "I don't know," I said, rubbing my face with the back of my hand. "I mean, I'm doing what I love. I'm restoring these cars, keeping this collection alive. I've never felt more alive, I guess." I paused, trying to put my thoughts into words. "But sometimes, yeah, I wonder if I'm losing sight of who I was before all this." She nodded, her expression gentle. "I think it's easy to get caught up in the pressure, the expectations of others. I see how much this means to you, but I also know that you're not just a mechanic or a guy who works on cars. You're more than that. And I want to make sure you're still seeing that too." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Mia had always been the one to remind me of who I was, even when I didn't know how to find that person again. She was the one who had always believed in me, even when I didn't. But hearing her speak about my own identity, about who I was beneath the surface, made me realize how much I had changed in such a short time. "I guess I haven't thought about it much," I said, my voice quieter now. "I've been so focused on doing this work, on fitting in, that I haven't really asked myself if I'm still me. But you're right. I don't want to lose sight of what makes me, well, me." Mia stepped closer, reaching out to take my hand. "You don't have to choose between the two," she said softly. "You can still be the person you were, who you are, and do this. Just don't forget what makes you you in the process. It's easy to lose yourself in the roles other people want you to play, but you don't need to be anyone other than who you are." Her words were a balm to my soul, a reminder that I didn't have to be anyone's version of who I should be. I had spent so long trying to earn the approval of Mia's parents, trying to prove myself in a world that didn't seem to have a place for someone like me, that I had almost forgotten the most important thing. I didn't need to prove anything. Not to them. Not to anyone. I was already enough. "Thanks," I said, squeezing her hand. I needed to hear that. She smiled, the warmth of it reaching her eyes. "I know you did." We stood there in silence for a moment, the only sound the distant hum of the estate's generators and the soft ticking of the clock on the garage wall. For the first time in a while, I felt the weight on my shoulders lighten. I didn't have to chase approval or recognition. I just had to keep doing what I loved, and the rest would fall into place. "Let's go for a walk," Mia said, breaking the silence. "I think we both could use a break." I nodded, grateful for the time with her. As we walked out of the garage together, hand in hand, I realized that no matter what challenges lay ahead, no matter what pressure I felt from the outside world, I had everything I needed right here. I had Mia, I had the work I loved, and most importantly, I had my sense of self. And that, I knew, was all I truly needed to be happy. In life, it's easy to get caught up in trying to meet others' expectations or chasing validation from outside sources. But true fulfillment comes from staying true to yourself and embracing what you love. Don't lose sight of who you are in the pursuit of approval or success. Be confident in your skills, your values, and your journey. It's not about fitting into someone else's world. It's about carving your own path, doing what you're passionate about, and trusting that the right people will recognize your worth. Authenticity is your greatest asset. Never let anyone make you forget that.